Thanks a lot, George. Greg and I are delighted to be here. We're both qualified in submarines at about the same time in the late 60s and early 70s. Greg served on a diesel powered boat. And I make that distinction because I was on a nuclear boat. You might think weapons versus propulsion. It was both. My job was to run the propulsion plant in the engine room. So we would be glad to answer questions you might have or talk about life on a submarine or what did we experience or talk to you about our patches. These patches represent places we never went and things we never did because, you know, we served in the silent service. So Greg and I are submarine sailors. We're here to tell you some stories this evening. Submarine sailors are pretty good at telling stories. One of them will be about the past and another will be about the future or the present. My remarks pertain to the past. So with that, let me mention that there was, once upon a time, the Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company. It was famous for building ore carriers and ferries that served on the Great Lakes. At the onset of World War II, Manitowoc Shipbuilding asked the Navy if the Navy could use some destroyers, some surface ships. And the Navy said, no, we have enough of those. How about some submarines? Well, who builds a submarine in the middle of the country on a Great Lake? And Manitowoc was shy at first, but then the Navy offered to send blueprints and engineers from our premier submarine building company called Electric Boat in Groton, Connecticut, to Manitowoc. And after having studied the plans and such, Manitowoc Shipbuilding agreed, yeah, we'll make some submarines for you. So they were given a contract for 10 boats. We call submarines boats. They did continue in the shipbuilding business for a period of time. Currently, they're in the food service business. You might have seen their name on an ice maker in a hotel someplace. The submarine production process was unclear. They were given a contract for 10 with the hope that there would be some others. And they were successful in building their first one and delivering it early. In fact, they were given 2 subsequent 10-boat contracts after the first contract that they constructed, but the 28th boat was built just at the end of the war. The Marrow never saw action. 25 of the 28 saw action in World War II. 24 returned from war. We lost 4 boats, 4 Manitowoc built boats during the war. And that is part of the reason we now have a memorial in Chicago. Manitowoc undertook the construction of boats on the side of the Manitowoc River in Wisconsin. If you've ever been there, you might remember the river's kind of narrow. And a traditional ship launch is stern first into the water. If they were to have done that in Manitowoc, the stern would have struck the bank on the other side of the river. So one of the first things they had to figure out was, how do we get this thing in the water? And they decided, well, how about sideways? Nobody had ever done it. But they did some calculations and launched this particular boat, the first one. They had to calculate the roll to make sure it didn't go all the way over. And in fact, it took a 47-degree roll, I think, Greg?
I think so.
Yeah, that's a pretty steep roll. And we've been on boats that rolled in the sea, and 47 degrees is pretty significant. But it worked. So they were then able to prove their technique of sideways launch, which had never been done before. They did sea trials on Lake Michigan in all manner of weather. And once the boats were deemed suitable to the Navy, they had to get to the Pacific for the war. How do you think the boats got to the Pacific? Who thinks they might know how the boats got from Manitowoc, Wisconsin to the Pacific? St. Lawrence Seaway wasn't built. 1959. They sailed the subs from Manitowoc to Chicago. And in Chicago, they took off the parts that stick up quite a bit, called the shears, because they couldn't fit under some of the bridges. And they took them through the city of Chicago, generally under cover of darkness at night. Traffic was low, they had to raise the bridges. It was kind of a big deal. A buddy of mine worked at the Tribune some years ago when we were raising funds to build a memorial, and I asked if he could look in their archives, their photographic archives, for pictures of any submarines passing through the city. And again, the silent service moniker prevailed, and there were no pictures that he was able to find. But they did pass right through the heart of the city. The first one actually went all the way to New Orleans under its own power. But in a submarine, we use cooling, we suck in a lot of water to cool equipment. And the intakes were so low on the hull and the river was so shallow that they sucked in mud and decided that's not a very good idea going forward. So the rest of the boats were taken to Lockport, Illinois, where they were put on a barge. And the barge then carried them the rest of the way to New Orleans, where they were reassembled and sent off through the Panama Canal off to the Pacific. And you could somewhat envision a Midwest submarine trail that would include, it could start in Manitowoc, it would include Chicago and a few other spots. We have other clubs that are building memorials along the way. Generally, it's a torpedo or some of the piece of the ship or a gravestone of some sort. But there's a lot of submarine history in the Midwest that you probably didn't learn about in your history class if you grew up around here. In fact, if I were to ask you, where would you go if you wanted to look at a submarine? Where would anybody go to look at a submarine? You could, if you go to the Museum of Science and Industry, you'll see a German submarine. Where would you go to look at an American submarine? Lake Michigan. Well, Manitowoc would be a good guess. And there's one more. It's the Silversides across in Michigan, in Muskegon, Michigan. They're both excellent boats. The one in Manitowoc and the one in Muskegon have been very well maintained. They are a very accurate representation of what our sailors would have seen during the war. The U-505, where some of our buddies volunteer, has been adapted to be ADA accessible, so you don't get quite the same impact. You don't crack your head quite as often going through the watertight doors. So if you wanted to take your grandkids someplace or your family, you want a nice outing, we can recommend all three of those locations. We favor Manitowoc since we're affiliated with the the Wisconsin Maritime Museum in Manitowoc. But I can also tell you, if you have like a summer home around the bottom of the lake, take a look at the Silversides. It's a nice piece of equipment. There was an organization called the U.S. Submarine Veterans of World War II, and my friends Alvy and Charlie Waddell were members of what we call affectionately WWII. The organization has since folded itself into our group because they died and sailors were passing away and they were not minting any new ones. So those sailors became part of our group, U.S. Submarine Veterans Incorporated. But in 2010, we had submarine birthday ball. It was a pretty big event with a nice dinner. And we had a speaker, sit down feed and a speaker. And at the end of the meal, Alvy popped up and grabbed the microphone. I told you he was somewhat of a curmudgeon. Grabbed the microphone and challenged us to do something to remember Pearl Harbor. Our keynote speaker had been a Pearl Harbor survivor. So we took that to heart and wondered, what would we do to remember Pearl Harbor? And after 3 or 4 years, we decided we could put a plaque on a handrail, perhaps along the Chicago River, where those 28 boats had passed on their way to war. So we approached the city of Chicago and said, hey, we have this great idea. We'd like to make a plaque. We found a vendor, weatherproof, graffiti-proof, make a nice plaque. It meets your standards. What do you think? And they said, can you do something bigger? And we put our heads together and came up with this design. Actually, you'll hear in just a minute. This is the product of the genius of the son of one of our members who came up with the design. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. It does, if you look at the curvature of the bulkhead in the picture where the watertight door is attached, that curvature represents the same curvature of a bulkhead in one of these World War II boats. The watertight door is an actual watertight door from an American submarine called the Trout. It was built in the 1950s, but it's exactly the same kind of watertight door that Greg and I would have traversed many, many times. The foundation on which this sits, the round stone foundation, is the circumference of the submarine. It's the same diameter as the beam of the boat going across. The seats on those 2 benches are made of teak. Teak was the material used for the decks on the submarines. And if you recall, the boats coming through Chicago at night with the bridges open, we have a Photoshop image. We don't have any real pictures, but we have a Photoshop image of a boat passing under the open Lakeshore Drive Bridge, and it's etched in steel on the memorial that you can see. If you sit on the bench where that person is sitting and look through the watertight door, you'll see the exact spot where that happened 28 times. It's a pretty impressive site. This particular memorial is on the Riverwalk. It's now owned by the city of Chicago. You can visit it. It's just east of, well, a little bit east of the Vietnam Memorial. It's in Chicago as well. We dedicated the memorial in 2019. The City of Chicago participated and allowed us to use their fireboat with part of our celebration. And these are the three spots where you can go to visit boats, either here for the U-505 or Manitowoc or Muskegon for silver sightings. This is a picture of the Cobia. It's the same. Greg will fill you in. It's not a Manitowoc built boat, but it's like the Manitowoc built boats. And as we were raising money, we raised about $250,000 to build the thing by going to flea markets and selling chocolate and bracelets and books and some of the things you see on display. It took a long time, a lot of flea markets. Greg was a real stalwart in organizing our attendance at gun shows and farmers markets, and it took a long time to raise $250,000, but we did it. And we had the memorial constructed. You heard him say that we lost 52 boats during World War II. During the course of the war, we had access to about 250. The loss rate was about 22%, the highest in any military component in any of our services. Does anyone have an idea how many submarines the Germans had during World War II? Something, it's about 1,150. And they lost over about 800. So their loss rate was pretty close to 68 or 69%, 3 times what our loss rate is. And in speaking with some of our friends, we think the primary difference was the quality of the sailors who took our boats to sea. So even though we did have a significant loss rate, we also sank a lot of Japanese tonnage. And Greg and I are proud to be here this evening to share with you our stories. Great.
My name is Greg Miller. As machinist mate second, had the honor of serving on board USS Carbonero, SS 337 from 1967 to 70. Carbonero, like much of our fleet at that time, was World War II leftover. She was built in 1944, made well, 1.5 war patrols. The ceasefire came on her second war patrol. She never fired a torpedo, but she did make a few deck gun attacks. And then the war was over. And it served various functions till I got her. Here we are. Well, this 632 is the Van Steuben, that's Chris's boat. 337 is mine. That's the Carbonero. That's the way she looked when I served on her. After the war, they took off her deck guns. It was retrofitted with a snorkel so that we could charge batteries without surfacing. And it got a streamlined fairing around the conning tower. Beyond that, she's pretty much World War II. So, but that's Carbonero. And we are looking for the Cobia. Cobia was built in, well, our keel was laid in March 17th, 1943. So when you're celebrating St. Patrick's Day, we're celebrating Cobia's birthday. She was commissioned in March of 1944. And her first war patrol began on the 26th of June, 1944. The war was over in August 1945. So she served for about 14 months in combat situations. Submarine force, we yeah, we did take some significant losses. We also didn't recognize, well, these are Japanese waters. No, they're not. We can go there. Submarines went in where the surface fleet couldn't. And accounted for about 55% of the Japanese ships lost, including about a third of their warships. And cutting the supply lines, Japan has virtually no natural resources. Everything has to come in by ship. You take out the ships, you got a serious problem. Cobia made 6 war patrols during her period, during World War II. War patrol is normally about 60 days, maybe 55, maybe 50, somewhere in that neighborhood. She'd come back from a war patrol, be in port for about 3 weeks, resupply, make repairs, get the latest updates. And then there's a war going on, back out to sea for another couple months. And that's life on a submarine. And in that 14 months and her 6 war patrols, she sank 13 enemy ships, 9 merchants and 4 warships. She also picked up 7 downed aviators that had been shot. B-24 got shot up on a raid on Saigon. Where have you heard that before? But this was when it was under Japanese control. Well, it was American flyers out there. You got to pick them up. And they did. They were achieved, all 7. And did get some recognition for their efforts. By war's end, Cobia had received the Navy Cross, which is the Navy's highest award for valor, the Silver Star, Bronze Star, the Submarine Combat Pin, the Treasury Department's Life Saving Award, and 4 Battle Stars. And sadly, 1 Purple Heart. There was 1 crewman who was killed in action in a surface battle with some Japanese trawlers. That's really rare in the submarine service. Usually when there's a fatality, it's an entire crew. So where is she to, well, yeah, the aviators got the glory, and the submarine service is the silent service, and for good reason, because not only is stealth her tactical advantage, it's also her only real protection. So, well, it's been a long time since the war. We can talk about it now. Let's see. So, engagements with the Japanese were usually 1 at a time, and not really terribly spectacular. It's not the battleship versus battleship, and the carriers are, the planes are zooming in. No, it doesn't go that way. If we were to make a movie about it, it'd be pretty boring. But there was an engagement that Cobia did in 1944. She single-handed attacked a 3-ship convoy, sank 2 out of the 3. And as it turned out, that was a tank battalion on its way to Iwo Jima to reinforce the garrison there. Well, they didn't get their tanks. They went to the bottom, along with a lot of their troops. During World War II, the Japanese actually lost more troops at sea than they did on the islands. As bloody a campaign as those were, more of them were taken out by submarines at sea. And the the survivors of the 5th Marine Division, if you go up to Manitowoc, you can see it. It's posted in the theater. Is a thank you note signed by a whole bunch of Marines. As a thank you to the Cobia and her crew for eliminating that tank battalion. A lot of them survived that might not have had Cobia not acted the way she did. This is Cobia's launching, and you may notice this one is going in stern first. That's because she was built in Groton, Connecticut. And there's enough water, they can launch stern first. Now so she's not actually a Manitowoc boat. However, the blueprints that were used by Manitowoc came from Groton, Connecticut. They're peas in a pod. You've seen one, you've seen them all. And that was her first Captain and Mrs. Becker, and their daughter, boat sponsor, Captain Becker. Well, I've had the honor of meeting and conversing with a few of Cobia's crew, as well as Captain Becker's son. Paid us a visit. I think it's about 4 years ago now. Getting some of the sea stories, and they both the crew and the captain have great respect for each other, and they could not have done what they did without everybody being a crackerjack. And it's a commissioning group, all dressed up fancy. That was Ralph Houston, and well, this is typical underway submarine attire. Not your fancy dress blues. No, it's shorts. We could get fatigues from Air Force surplus. They were secondhand, and yeah, they were good enough because we didn't have to pay for them. Cut the legs off. There you go. T-shirt, sandals. Nothing too fancy, but he was the loader on the 20mm gun, and unfortunately, he was killed in combat. And that's Cobia's battle flag. The 9 hash marks on the left are for the merchant ships. The 4 under the rising sun are the warships. 7 downed aviators. And if you notice, the fish has sergeant stripes. Well, what's that all about? Another name for a cobia is a sergeant fish. So they covered all the bases. Today she's at the Wisconsin Maritime Museum. That picture was taken in Milwaukee. Cobia's after World War II, she was decommissioned in 1946. The war was over, and she waited patiently till 1959 when she was reactivated, or excuse me, 1952 when she was reactivated and used for training submariners at submarine school in New London, Connecticut. They take them out for a day cruise. Here, this is a real submarine. This is this is how this thing works. Are you sure you want to ride one of these things? Because it's a good time to back out. Nobody's gonna hold it against you. She served in that capacity until 1959. At that time, she was considered too obsolete to be training new submariners. There were nuclear powered submarines coming in. So she was delivered to Milwaukee, reworked, take the batteries out, take the screws off, disconnect a bunch of linkages. And she served in Milwaukee as a training platform for naval reservists until 1970, when the Navy says, this thing is just too far back. And well, the submarine vets of World War II said, hey, this is not going to the scrap heap. They saved Cobia, they raised the necessary funds and brought her to New Manitowoc, Wisconsin, where she is today. Since then, there she is going into Manitowoc, not under her own power, alas, but she has a new home and a new mission. Today she lives at the Wisconsin Maritime Museum. And if you're ever wondering about what's it like on a submarine, well, I'm not impartial, but I was down to U505 maybe a couple months back, and I hadn't seen it since I was a pup. And it didn't really seem very submarine-like to me. A lot of it has been cut out in order to be handicapped accessible. Plus, as far as the tours, they have the tour guides have to shoot people through. You got 20 minutes. And they've got to talk about the submarine itself, life on the submarine, and the capture of the submarine, and get it all in 20 minutes. Rock's a rock. It just can't be done. Cobia, on the other hand, is not real handicapped accessible. It was never intended to be. It was intended for able-bodied sailors to make their way through and take on the Japanese and sink their ships. Creature comforts, well, not so much. This is not a cruise ship. This is a submarine. There is a stairway going down to get in and another one to get out at the other end. And that's the extent of it. As you go through, watch your head. We don't want you putting any dents in our submarine. And in addition, the Cobia is, well, there is the Silver Sides, which is in Muskegon, which if you want to take a drive around the bottom end of Lake Michigan to get over there, well, that's nice. You can deal with the nightmare of traffic to go down to see the Museum of Science and Industry. Or you can hop on the I-94 and go north, and in about 2 hours, you're in Manitowoc without all the traffic headaches, without paying a fortune for parking. The submarine is open all year round. You can go in and see it. Right now they're on winter hours, so Tuesday and Wednesday they're closed. But now you go in on Saturday, there's guided tours. Take about 45 minutes. There's also a tablet that there's numbers along the way and you can punch it in and it'll talk to you. And that takes about 45 minutes. There's a very abbreviated, I'm not impressed by it. A little sheet that, yeah, if you're in a hurry, yeah, you can do it in no time at all. They also have specialty tours, which come up about once a month, where if you're a gearhead, really curious about the submarine, and it'll take you into spaces that aren't normally a part of the regular tour. There's also a diving deeper tour, which is the one that I do. And that's not so much about the submarine as what it's like to live on one of these things. And it is not like anything. It's not just a vessel, it's a lifestyle. And now the specialty tours take 2.5 hours to complete. And group size is limited to 10. So it's best that you know, if you want to do it, get your tickets early because they do fill up. Also, well, the other thing that we have up and coming is this Cobia. While we do take care of her as best we can, she does need to go into dry dock periodically for hull maintenance, to be inspected, repaired as necessary, get rid of those zebra mussels, and they are thick. And you have to get those off first before you can tell what her condition is. Get a new anti-fouling coating and get her back in the water so that she'll be around for, well, Cobia was intended to have a life expectancy of 20, 25 years. She's now going on 82. And well, it wasn't supposed to last that long, but we kept her going. And we want her to be around for as long as a frog is a reptile with edible legs. So we are working on fundraising for that. There's a bunch of good-looking people up there on the after deck, as well as other folks enjoying it. And it's there for you to enjoy as well. I can sit here and talk till I'm blue in the face, and you'll never get the picture of what it is to be in a submarine. And even at that, it's difficult to grasp what it's like when you got a full crew of young bucks. I mean, hey, we're in our 20s, early 20s, fresh out of high school. And here's this submarine, and Uncle Sam sells us. Take it out and drive it around and punch holes in the ocean. How cool is that? You want a Disney cruise? We got one up on that. But that's what we're up to. And we've got a few items in the back that are available in a donation jar. And all of that is going into the dry dock fund.